Hey folks, this is the beginning of a series I've wanted to do for a long time. I always quote Camellia Elias and say that the cards don't mean anything, and I like to do that because it's kind of provocative and it gets people sort of anxious. Well, I don't like making people anxious. Maybe I do, I don't know. Anyway, it is provocative and it makes people go, oh, what do you mean? And in reality, I mean that literally. The cards don't mean anything until they come into a reading, until they come into context with one another, and until they come into a dance with a question. I know it may seem strange to say it, but really when you're looking at a deck outside of a reading, it's just a blank stack of cards. I know there's pictures on them, even in Marseille decks, but they don't have any intrinsic meaning. They don't have any intrinsic life until they are put to a purpose. Even if what you're doing is magical work, path working, meditation, it's only when you set the intention that they mean something that they do. Now, this is especially true for the majors, the trumps. I never really know what to call them anymore. I used to like the trumps until Donald Trump entered our lives. And I don't like the major arcana because I actually think that's a misleading term. It sets us up to think that there's something grand, inherently grand about them, when in reality they're just as important and no more important than the minors. They're just a part of the deck and they represent different metaphors and they represent them in a different way. But when you're doing reading, and it's important to know that this series is about tarot reading. It's not about anything more broad than that. It's not about magical work. It's not about meditation. It's not about path working. It's about tarot reading. You can have all of those things. This won't take anything away from that. But the aim is to bring the trumps down to earth and to see them in real life, because tarot is about real life. And that's sort of the aim as we go through this series of videos. Most of them will be relatively short, at least by my standards. But the goal is to help you bring those cards down to earth so that they're useful in the context of the kinds of things people want readings about. In my time, I have expected from querents and clients a kind of desire for magic, a kind of desire for spiritual clarity that really most people don't have. And when you think about your own life, how much of your day do you spend thinking about the big spiritual questions as opposed to the banal ones, like what you're going to make for dinner and why your partner's being such a jerk tonight? The reality of reading for others is that they want to know about what's going on in their lives right at that moment. They want to understand the thing that doesn't make sense. And a lot of times what doesn't make sense is our job, is our relationship, is our family, our money. Those are the things we need to know about. The trumps can speak to that as much as the minors can. And it can be intimidating when a trump comes into a reading to think that it means something bigger than maybe it does. And so what we're going to do is explore the daily aspects of these cards and how they exist in the day-to-day world that most people want readings about. Now, there's really no better card to start with than the Fool, because when the Golden Dawn got their hands on the cards, or I really should say when the French esoterists who preceded the Golden Dawn got their hands on the cards, they were presented with some of the cards that were a problem for them. They simply just didn't fit into this mystical mold. 3 in particular got major glow-ups: the Fool, the Magician, and the Hanged Man. Obviously, I'll have videos on the Magician and the Hanged Man later. Today we're going to talk about the Fool. What's interesting about the Fool is that in a way it's become an avatar for tarot. It has become not just the tarot, but us as tarot readers, as tarot students, and as people going through our lives. We've heard the story of the Fool's journey, which I kind of think today is maybe less helpful than it was intended to be, at least in terms of how I read. And the reason for that is the Fool's journey is a very linear story. The hero's journey is a very linear story, and the tarot is not linear at all. We rarely look at the deck in order when we're reading for others. In fact, if we do, it's purely an accident. That's not to say the Fool's journey can't have any influence for you or be useful. It's just that understanding the tarot in that way puts it into something major, into something grand. And again, I know it's sort of iconoclastic and maybe even annoying when I kind of blast away at this banal version of tarot, but it is why people come for readings. One of the things I do when I lead workshops, particularly foundational workshops, is when we talk about the trump cards, I ask the participants to describe the title of the card as literally as they can. I have a video about how the title is really the card, that whatever is on the card is an artistic interpretation of, or a judgment value of, that title. But the title is really the card. And that, again, annoys people because when we look at the card, of course, what we see is the image. But the image is an impression of a title. And when it comes to the Fool, and as we'll see, the Magician and the Hanged Man, the esotericists were presented with an obstacle. Even in the French decks, the title of the Fool is rarely actually Le Fou, which is the French word for the Fool. It's Le Mat, which is mostly translated as the Madman. That doesn't work from an esoteric standpoint, right? You can't have a mad person. And when you see the Marseille, the early French and Italian images of the card, it's also not a very attractive fool. You know, I mean, I've grown to love the Marseille images today, but what you get really is a hobo with a cat clawing at its pee-pee. If you go back to the first extant Marseille deck, the Noblette, you will see the guy's balls hanging out. I mean, it's not the embodiment, the avatar of spiritual awakening that the Golden Dawn and the other esotericists needed. And Waite in particular took that and transformed it into Pamela Coleman Smith's iconic image of the Fool. I mean, it is one of the most beautiful cards, I think, in any tarot deck. And I used to actually wear it as a pendant because it represented everything I wanted to be. Free, uninhibited by anxiety and fear, willing to take chances and go on adventures. I really wanted to be that. Of course, what I didn't know when I was young and starting to learn this at 18 or 19 was that I was not capable of doing that. It just didn't become part of my nature. But I wanted it to be. I wanted to move to New York and do all the things. If I'd done that when I was 20 years old, it would have destroyed me. So I'm lucky that I didn't. And I have many friends who did, and it destroyed them too, at least temporarily. But the idea of coming from the religion of my youth, which was very restrictive, into a free, open state of uninhibited joy was everything to me. And there are moments in life when that is a feeling that we need to find in a tarot reading. And then there are other times where that's not a feeling that really makes much sense. There are two schools of thought, or probably even more than that, about how a tarot reading works. Some readers will say that the Fool would never show up in a reading where it doesn't represent that expansive, open quality. And that's valid. And then there are readers like me who, from first-hand experience, know that there are times where you get the Fool or any other card at a time where its grand esoteric meanings don't make sense or don't answer the question easily. And even times when that esoteric bigness is contradictory to the situation that we're dealing with. Imagine that I came to you for a reading with the question, should I eat nothing but bad fast food for the rest of the month? You draw the Fool. By traditional definitions, that would be a hell yes. Take a chance, do something new, try the thing. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. Go with the flow. Now, objectively, if I can afford not to eat fast food every day for the rest of the month, I should probably take that path rather than eating fast food. Let's acknowledge that there are parts of the world where fast food is the only reasonable source of protein, and so people eat it. But it's not healthy. And we can get into the politics of that in another video. But the idea is simply that the Fool in that situation does not suggest being open and taking a chance. It would be really bad advice if you told me yes. And that's because the Fool sometimes just is what it is. And this is why when I do these classes, I ask people to start with the title. Because what is a fool? A fool's a fool. A fool's an idiot. A fool's a moron. I mean, when we just look at the language and we divorce it from all of the esoteric lacquer that Waite and the Golden Dawn and other esotericists have spent hundreds of years painting onto it, sometimes, to misquote Freud, a cigar is just a cigar. And so if I were asking you if I should eat nothing but fast food and you told me yes, not great advice. If, on the other hand, you said, you know what, that would be really foolish. That would be an ideal interpretation of the card, wouldn't it? And that's the point I'm trying to get to, is that sometimes we get stuck in the esoteric. Sometimes we get stuck in the bigness. Sometimes we get lost in the lacquer. And we forget that sometimes the fool just means being foolish. Sometimes I think I have to present caveats when I talk this way because I think, and maybe I'm misreading the room, people think that I'm saying you have to give up all that esoteric bigness in order to read this way. And that's not true. It's just that context dictates meaning. The cards don't mean anything until they're in context. The Fool could mean any number of things, and I'm not saying you don't need some foundational understanding of what that card can mean. You need something to stand on. But what we have to do as readers is be open to what the card looks like in the real world, not just in the pages of esoteric texts that are inspired by or were written 100 years ago by old white dudes. That's not what life looks like today. I mean, let's be honest, even at the time those books were written, life didn't look that way. The people who could afford to sit around and think about esoteric thoughts were the people who had money and didn't have to work to put food on the table. Or they were living off their alkalites. So esotericism has never really reflected the world that most of us live in. It's always been written from a place of privilege. And oftentimes it took oppressed people's teachings and wove them in without giving credit or understanding them fully, which is why Kabbalah is a problematic association. But again, I'll just save little snarky comments like that and let you wrestle with why. We need to see the tarot through the world. We need to see what the tarot looks like in the life around us, because that's what we're reading about. Back in my early days, when I first started watching YouTube, way before I had a channel, I would watch a lot of painting videos to relax. This was also before ASMR was a thing. But inspired by my love for Bob Ross, I would find really relaxing painting videos. I'm not an artist. I think that I could draw when I have something to guide me, but I think the thing that separates a dabbler from an artist is that an artist has vision. They can see the thing. They have inspiration. I don't have that. But I can understand the way things work. And what I noticed after I was watching all of these painting videos and absorbing technique is that when I would go out for a drive, I started to see the world differently. I started to see the way that the trees on the highway, though the leaves are objectively all green, really aren't that way when you're perceiving them. There's actually a patch of orange here, and then red, and then bright yellow in the distance where the cloud breaks through. So you start to see the way a painter sees when you watch a lot of painting. When you become a tarot reader, if you tune yourself to life, you start to see the tarot through that lens. I would argue, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, that one of the faults of the way that most of us learn tarot is that we learn to see the world through tarot rather than tarot through the world. By which I mean we have to look at the world through an esoteric lens rather than looking at the tarot through a daily lens. And that's helpful if your focus with tarot is spirituality. But if your focus is divination, particularly fortune telling or some similar adjunct of that, the esoteric clouds up and gets in the way, and it can make your job as a reader harder. But it can also make your querents or your clients, if you charge, confused. It can cloud things by using language and concepts that just don't make sense in everyday life and that most people don't have access to because they're not thinking this way, because they're not reading the great esoteric texts. The Fool is something that you see in the world every day. Imagine you're sitting at a restaurant and you're just casually glancing at the table next to you and you overhear someone talking to their date about how they've been really working on counting calories and they've been doing really well, and they're just so torn between the salad and the chicken parm. That moment right there is the Fool in real life. It's that moment where the person's about to jump off the cliff and make a decision. And when they choose the chicken parmesan, whether or not that's a foolish act depends a lot on the context. If they've been doing really well and this is a treat, then there's not really much foolish about that. We all deserve it. In fact, total abstainment from things we love will ensure that we actually fall off diets more easily. But if they've been cheating all week, it's just a continuation of bad choices, right? Or I don't like the term bad choices, of suboptimal choices, I guess. But that moment right there, that's the Fool. The moment where you wonder whether you should have a second piece of pizza. The moment where you wonder whether you should get the venti instead of the tall. All of those are moments of the Fool in real life. Do I run this stoplight because there's no one around and it's late? That's a Fool moment. Steve Jobs was a fool in the tarot terms. Because when he started Apple, he was taking an incredible leap of faith. He believed in what he was doing, but everyone said this is nuts and it's never going to be a world where people have computers in their homes, let alone their pockets. But he did it anyway. That was a fool moment. But he faced a lot of fool moments over the course of his career. One of them being that the side effects of Apple computers and the computer world in general is that amazing things happened. Not only can I make this video for you and host it on a computer somewhere in the world, and you can watch it anywhere in the world that has open internet, but we have computers in our pockets. There's life-saving technology that has been created as a result of what Apple and other companies done what they did. At the same time, it's come at incredible cost to the environment. We cannot deny the fact that the technology we use is soaking resources out of the ground. And not just that, but some of the minerals and natural resources that are being sucked out of the ground only exist in parts of the world that are torn by war and poverty, and that our consumption of these products actually contributes to people's death and suffering. But it's not just computers. When you buy that crystal, that's a fool moment, because maybe it's a healing tool. But the problem is, the market is such that we don't really know where those things came from, and there has been and continues to be an incredible amount of child labor in the crystal mining industry. And so it's a choice at a moment where we decide one thing over another. And I'm not saying the fool card is about choice, I'm just saying it's on that moment of standing on a precipice. Steve Jobs stood on a precipice when he created Apple computers. He stood at a precipice when he created the iPad. He stood at a precipice when he decided to focus on work and homeopathic remedies over technology and medicine for a long time with his health. Are those right or wrong choices? We don't really know. But the point is, those moments were fool moments in real life, and we all face them. And the thing that I'm trying to get at here, ultimately, is that's the fool in tarot when we're doing a reading. Even if in meditation or intention setting or spell work, it is that vast expanse of freedom, that moment of awakening, or that innocence in search of experience. The tarot gets to be many things at the same time. But when we try to make it one thing all the time, it makes our readings harder and makes our interpretations muddier. And it can often lead to sometimes tricky or erroneous answers. Especially, and I think that the fast food example is objectively a silly one, but it's clear. If that's the kind of answer we're giving people that is objectively wrong, but it's what the card says, then there's a problem there. You know, and you can paint it another way. If it's a relationship reading and someone says, should I go on this date tonight? Maybe the fool is suggesting, yeah, go have fun, go experience this new thing. But if you happen to know that the person your friend is going to date has been emotionally abusive in the past, then that fool moment is not go forth with abandon. It's you'd be a fool to do this. You know what I mean? And so that's what I'm getting at when it comes to the fool. It's more than just and less than just what we read in the books. We have to understand the card both literally and metaphorically. Another way to think about the fool too is historically, because there are times in which the fool is not about vast freedom, or even about making choices or standing on the precipice of something big, or trying to decide between something that may not be good for us, or taking a leap. There are times where we can use the fool as a historical model where the fool was able to do things that others couldn't do, like speak truth to power, because they were witty about it and they could entertain the kings. And so there's times where that metaphor can come into play in a reading. How do I handle this situation with my boss? Well, you need to play the historical fool who can speak in riddles, entertain and tell the truth, be wily and smart about it. So the encouragement here is not so much that you believe any of the things that I've said about the fool from an interpretation standpoint, because in your own readings you're going to find different things. The point is rather that you start seeing the fool in the world, in ways that are daily, in ways that actually exist in our lives. There are moments where we have to take great leaps of faith. But if we had to do that every day, we'd be exhausted. And some high-risk jobs or professions may put people in that position often. And so contextually, big, vast moments when the fool shows up in a reading make sense. Most of us, though, don't. And so if it's about fast food, if it's about relationships, if it's about our kids, we have to contextualize the bigness of that fool into the context of the moment and real life. And so when we say the cards don't really mean anything, what we're really saying is be open to the possibility that the card could mean a whole lot of things depending on the context. And that the more context you have, the more able you are to understand which fool you're dealing with in a reading. Let context guide you, and don't let the card take over. The card works for you, not the other way around. The card serves the question and the querent, not the other way around. The fool has to answer the question. That's the contract we make with the cards when we shuffle and draw. It should not bully you into being about something other than the question, and it should answer the question logically. Now, this is another reason why I always say 3 cards are better than 1, because additional cards can help rein in the possibilities for each of the other cards. But the idea ultimately is the fool has to live in the real world as much as the ephemera of esotericism. And so the homework for you is to go out into the world and start seeing the fool there. What I don't mean are visual statues or moments of posture where you see that fool image. I mean the choices, the moments of foolness or foolishness. The conversations you overhear, you say, oh, that's the fool. The overhearing the person in the restaurant saying, I kind of want the chicken parm instead of the salad. You know, the moment of, I think I'll just have another drink, fuck it. All of those little things, all of those little daily moments, look for them in the world and start to understand the fool that way. Not just in the esoteric way. And again, I will say, you don't need to give up those esoteric scented meanings. You just get to add to your arsenal an understanding of the card in daily life. And that's the whole point of this. Next week, we're going to talk about the Magician. And there's a whole hell of a lot to talk about with that card, because like the Fool, it got a pretty major makeover. Tell me how you see the fool in the real world. Feel free to make response videos to any of this or leave it in the comments. I hope this is helpful and interesting, and I hope the discussion sparks some things for you. I'm going to try to do these weekly. I can't commit to that because there's 22 major arcana cards, but for all my aim, I'm going to make it try to wish, I hope it can happen, kinda. So be on the lookout. Take care, be good, we'll talk soon.